After a long carriage ride, you eventually arrive at Windhelm. You walk across a stone bridge in the freezing snow, approaching the city gates. As you enter the city, the snow and mist does not seem to get any lighter, making the stone walls seem unwelcoming. But you continue on, hoping for an audience with the Jarl, so you head for the Palace of Kings. Here, in the brightly lit hall, you see the Jarl sitting waiting for you to approach. He says to you,
Yes. You were with us at Helgen. Destined for the chopping block, if I'm not mistaken.
Hello and welcome to Anatomy of Fiction. In today's video, we will be discussing the Stormcloaks. More specifically, what is the Stormcloaks' plan for Skyrim? To do this, we will firstly need to go over a few things. Starting with, who even are the Stormcloaks? So what exactly is this faction, along with the origins of this faction? After this, we will move on to the history of the Stormcloaks, so the events they have been involved in, what events triggered their existence leading up to the last Dragonborn's appearance. Then we will move on to their involvement in the Civil War and the Stormcloak Rebellion. Finally, we will discuss the important members of the Stormcloaks. So, let's begin with who are the Stormcloaks. So the Stormcloaks are known as the sons and daughters of Skyrim. Now the reason behind why this faction is called the Stormcloaks will depend on who you ask. According to members of the Stormcloaks, it started out as a sort of belittling or mocking of the cause. However, some members of the Imperial Legion, like Legate Rikke, claim that the Stormcloaks name comes from Ulfric Stormcloak's name, the group being named out of his vanity. So the Stormcloaks were originally a private military group established by Ulfric Stormcloak. Now, with the naming of the group, those who were members were accepting of both the name and of Ulfric as a leader. They considered him to be the true High King of Skyrim, having the real Nordic values of Skyrim. The Stormcloaks would, after their treatment at the hands of the Empire, move from a private militia into a full-on rebellion, with a key part of this being the Markath incident, where the Stormcloaks had managed to retake the Reach from the native Reachmen. For this, the Nords wanted to be allowed to worship Talos freely. However, under the White Gold Concordat, this was not allowed. And with this, it would lead to the Thalmor requesting the imprisonment of the Stormcloaks who had participated in the retaking of the Reach. This would set off much anger within the Stormcloaks, leading to the Stormcloaks as a group believing that Skyrim as a province needed to split from the corrupt and crumbling Empire, with members of the Stormcloaks being angered by the resolution of the Great War, believing that the Empire after the Great War were truly just the puppets of the Thalmor, who were the ruling council of the Third Aldmeri Dominion. With this resolution coming, of course, in the form of the imposition of the White Gold Concordat. Now, many were not happy with the terms of this treaty, many being outraged by what it outlined. Many Stormcloak supporters were also irritated by the use of Skyrim's resources to rebuild the Empire, leading to support from people like Thane Breiling over in Solitude, who believes that the Stormcloaks only rebel because the Empire uses Skyrim as its personal larder. The more they take, the more support the rebels gain. Considering that many of those in power did not share the views of Thane Breiling, instead her sharing those views with the more common folk of Skyrim. Much of the ruling members of society, like the Jarls, were loyalists appointed by the Empire. Along with this, the High King of Skyrim swearing their allegiance to the Empire made many feel as if the High King was just a puppet of the Empire, not having true merit. With all of this, it would influence the Stormcloaks in their decisions in wanting to remove the Empire and their influence in Skyrim. So based on who the Stormcloaks are, what is their plan for Skyrim? The Stormcloaks believe that Skyrim would be better off without the influence of the Empire. As with no Empire there to dictate the province, the citizens of Skyrim would be able to live much more freely without the drain on resources that the repair of the Empire is. Along with this, they would not have to hide parts of their religion due to the dictation of the Thalmor. So from this, we can see that the Stormcloaks' plan for Skyrim would begin by removing those considered loyal to the Empire, allowing for those who were considered to have Skyrim's best interests at heart to step into ruling positions. After this, we can see that it is likely that they would remove the ban on Talos worship, as this, at this time, was seemingly an important part of the Nord religion. It also seems as if the Stormcloaks desired to preserve and bring back back the Nordic way of life to Skyrim, removing all influence of the Empire. But this is only part of the story. To learn more, we should discuss the history of the Stormcloaks. When it comes to the history of the Stormcloaks, we should also first look into the Stormcloak clan, as Ulfric Stormcloak is not the first brave Nord that this clan has produced. In fact, this clan is believed to have existed in some form since the Merithic era. Members of the Stormcloak clan are able to trace their origins to the founding of Windhelm, being part of the founding members of the city. So this clan has had a strong influence throughout Skyrim throughout the eras. We should move on to just before the year 578 in the Second Era, this being with Skeglund Stormcloak. Skeglund was once a veteran of the Windhelm Guard, later becoming a member of the First Fighters Guild, being a skilled warrior with little patience for fools or trolls as seen with the depiction of him. Moving on to the year 582 in the Second Era, this is where we meet Mira Stormcloak. At the time, she served as the Thane of Windhelm. Now at this time, there was a celebration in the honor of Duran the Skald King. This celebration had many members from different clans, including members of the Stormfist clan, who had been in isolation after their prince's exile. This would lead Mira to grow suspicious about their motivations. Because of this, the Vestige would be appointed as the champion of the Stormcloaks, and would investigate what exactly the Stormfists were up to in Windhelm. Mira would be proven right about her suspicions, as the Stormfists would make an attempt on the life of Duran the High King, under the orders of Fildgor the exiled prince, who desired to take the throne from his brother. Yes, they were brothers. However, this would be stopped and the Stormfists would be defeated. So Mira Stormcloak is one of the early important members of the Stormcloaks, known for saving the High King of Skyrim from his own treacherous brother. Talk about difficult family dinners. But anyway, jumping forward to the year 175 in the Fourth Era, and into what would potentially drive the province of Skyrim away from the Empire. This being the White Gold Concordat. Now, the White Gold Concordat was the treaty that ended the Great War. This treaty was massively unfavorable to the Empire. In this treaty, the Blades would be disbanded, a large portion of southern Hammerfell would be given to the Aldmeri Dominion, and Talos worship would be outlawed. Now, the primary problem that the Nords would have with this is the outlawing of Talos worship. The Nords were angered by the treaty, considering that the Jarls were not even consulted about any of the terms, and they were unfairly affected by the banning of Talos worship. With this, there would not be heavy enforcement of the ban in the initial years of the treaty being in place. However, things would change, this being after the Markath incident. So the Markath incident is yet another important piece of history when it comes to the Stormcloaks. Now, what would allow the Markath incident to occur would take place in the year 174 in the Fourth Era, this being the invasion of the Imperial City by the Third Aldmeri Dominion. This would lead to the Reachmen taking the opportunity to invade the Reach and seize control of Markath, these Reachmen eventually being known as the Forsworn. This being because of the city being left vulnerable, as there were no Imperial Legionnaires guarding the city as there had previously been. They had been called back to the Imperial City to defend it. So because of this, the Reachmen were able to invade Markath. With the defense weakened, the Jarl of the Reach, Jarl Hrolfdir, was unable to stop the Reachmen uprising and would be driven out of Markath. Now, the Reachmen ruled Markath from the year 174 to 176 in the Fourth Era. However, there are very different stories as to what life was like under the rule of the Reachmen, with an Imperial scholar claiming that the Reachmen ruled Markath rather peacefully. But there is also the claims from the son of Jarl Hrolfdir, Jarl Igmund, that the independent kingdom founded by the Reach in Markath was little more than a chaotic uprising. The differences in the story continue, with the Imperial scholar claiming that the Stormcloaks sieged the city of Markath, attacking the city and committing war crimes. Ulfric had anyone who was within Markath executed if they were able to fight, but did not fight on the side of the Stormcloaks. However, this story is likely inflated and worsened by the Imperial author. In fact, it is stated by Jarl Igmund that he and his father reached out to Ulfric Ulfric for help, promising them the ability to worship Talos if they help to free the city from the Reachmen. The story of the Markath incident is rather muddy, with there being evidence of the executions and imprisonments of those who were believed to have been associated with the leaders of the Reachmen uprising in Markath. We see this with the comments from Braig, who is imprisoned at the Sidna mine. Braig claims that he only ever spoke to Madanak, the leader of the Forsworn, once, and for that he faced death. However, his daughter would step up to the executioner's block instead of him taking his punishment. However, he would still land in the mines. So there is evidence that there were executions and forced labor for those who were considered to be part of the Reachman occupation of Markath. However, it is unlikely to have been as severe as the Imperial author describes it. Either way, after the Markath incident was brought to an end by the Stormcloaks, who again desired Talos worship in return for their assistance with the Reachfolk, the Empire had quietly promised that the Stormcloaks could worship their god. But this would not happen, as the Thalmor would find out about this little deal, and it would lead to the Thalmor requesting that Ulfric and the Stormcloaks be arrested. Now, prior to this, Ulfric did not desire to rebel against the Empire. However, with the Empire willingly arresting Ulfric to stay on good terms with the elves, this is where the hatred for the Empire would really begin to bubble up. Ulfric and the Stormcloaks were just pawns in recovering the Reach, lied to and manipulated, then ultimately taking the fall and painted as the villains in the books of the Imperials. With the imprisonment of Ulfric and members of the Stormcloaks, it would prevent the Second Great War with the Aldmeri Dominion, but it would fracture the alliances with the Nords. Ulfric Stormcloak would remain in prison for 7 years, from the year 176 to 183 in the Fourth Era. During this time, he would watch his city and his country suffer from a distance, with his own father dying during his imprisonment. Ulfric would have to smuggle out a eulogy through a letter for his own father's funeral, highlighting the cruelty of his situation and increasing the divide between Ulfric and the Empire. Now, when Ulfric was eventually released from prison, he would be placed on the throne as the Jarl of Windhelm, his people demanding justice. With Ulfric released from prison, he would begin to see the start of the Stormcloak Rebellion. With this, there would be skirmishes between the Imperials and the Stormcloaks, with several injured and dying on both sides. But this would not be the main event in the lead up to the Civil War. No, this would occur in the year 201 in the Fourth Era. This would be Ulfric Stormcloak's request for an audience with the High King Torygg. Now, Torygg had believed that Ulfric had requested the audience to ask Torygg to declare Skyrim's independence from the Empire. However, this would not be the case. Instead, Ulfric would challenge Torygg to a duel, due to Torygg's allegiance to the Empire. Torygg knew that he did not stand a chance against Ulfric. However, if he denied the challenge, this would give Ulfric what he needed to request another moot, which would lead to Torygg losing his seat as High King. So, Torygg accepted the duel. Now, there are different accounts of what happened in this duel, with some claiming that Ulfric used his power of the voice to rip Torygg apart. However, Ulfric claimed that he used the power of the voice to shout him to the ground, then stabbed him in the heart. Ulfric would then escape the city, being branded as a traitor and a murderer by the Empire. This would be the final trigger for the Stormcloak Rebellion. So based on the history, what were the Stormcloaks' plans for Skyrim? Well, if we look at the events of Markath and the different stories along with the members of Sidna Mine, like Braig, we can observe that those who were members of the Reachman occupation have been forced into hard labor with claims that there have been executions by at least one of them. However, the leader of the Forsworn still lives, indicating that the harsh behavior that the Empire claims is likely heavily overinflated, to deter people from joining the cause, also being done to appease the Thalmor, who were angered by the demands of the Stormcloaks, with Ulfric and the other Stormcloaks being imprisoned, like those who were part of the Reachmen in the Markath incident. It indicated to them that they were considered as no better than the Reachmen who had originally overthrown the city of Markath. And with the Stormcloaks saving the city, they were just pawns in the Empire's and the Thalmor's game. Before the Empire imprisoned them, the Stormcloaks were willing to work with the Empire, not perceiving them as a foe. However, with this imprisonment, the Stormcloaks viewed the Empire as no better than the Thalmor that pulled the strings. Ulfric believed that Skyrim had been sold out to the Thalmor so the Emperor could keep his throne, even though many Nords had lost their lives attempting to defend the Empire. This betrayal would lead to Ulfric reconsidering his position on the Empire that he had actually previously fought for, viewing Skyrim's allegiance with the Empire as what was making the Nords weak. Ulfric wanted to restore Skyrim to the strong province it once was, removing the corruption of the Empire from the Jarls who took the Imperial coins to stay quiet about how they were weakening Skyrim, encouraging independent control of Skyrim and the Reach, along with allowing free worship of Talos. But this is only one piece of the puzzle, not the full picture. For this, we should move on to the Stormcloak Rebellion. Now, assuming that the last Dragonborn sided with the Stormcloaks who had given the option to choose a side in the Civil War. So with the Stormcloak Rebellion, we would firstly see Jarl Ulfric and some of his top lieutenants being captured whilst they were riding to Darkwater Crossing in southern Eastmarch. On the 5th of last seed, as they rode into Darkwater Crossing, they would be ambushed by General Tullius and his legionnaires. This ambush would lead to them being put to death, being transported to Helgen for them to be executed. Originally, they were heading into Cyrodiil, but there was a change of mind, and they would instead be put to death in Helgen. The captured members of the Stormcloaks, along with a thief and a traveller who was in the wrong place at the wrong time, would all arrive in Helgen. As they prepared to execute the unlucky traveller, there would be a distraction. This distraction coming in the form of a dragon attack. This dragon attack would save Ulfric and a few others from the literal chopping block, providing them with the ability to escape from certain death. However, it was also a warning sign to the Nords. As for the Nords, this dragon returning was a sign of the end of all days looming. After escaping and returning back to safety, Ulfric would meet the last Dragonborn again, who, as it turns out, was the unfortunate traveller who had been sentenced to death at his side. The last Dragonborn would request to join the Stormcloaks and would assist Ulfric in his goals. The last Dragonborn would assist Ulfric in his many endeavours both on and off the battlefield, with one of these being the retrieval of the Jagged Crown. Now, the Jagged Crown is an artifact of the Nords that used to be worn by the High Kings of Skyrim. However, it has not been seen since the First Era with the death of the last of Ysgramor's line, this being High King Borgas. Both Ulfric and the Imperials wanted the Jagged Crown, as this crown would legitimize the wearer's claim to the throne of Skyrim. The last Dragonborn would manage to obtain the Jagged Crown after fighting off members of the Imperial Legion who also wished to lay claim to this crown, along with defeating the powerful Draugr that King Boras had become. Not long after this, Ulfric would send a message to the Jarl of Whiterun, Balgruuf the Greater. Ulfric hoped this message in the form of his axe would sway the Jarl from his fence-sitting position onto the side of the Stormcloaks, as Ulfric did not wish to fight him. However, against the desires of Ulfric, Balgruuf would join the side of the Imperial Legion, providing Ulfric with no other choice. Balgruuf would allow General Tullius to station troops in his city. This decision would lead to the Battle for Whiterun, with the Stormcloaks attacking the city, setting up catapults and bombarding the city. The Stormcloaks would then go on to liberate several forts that were occupied by Imperial forces, retaking more and more of Skyrim with every battle, eventually setting their eyes on the City of Solitude, this city being known as the Imperial capital within Skyrim. By liberating this city, the Stormcloaks would rid Skyrim of the Imperial presence. So based on the Stormcloak Rebellion and Civil War, what can we tell about the Stormcloaks' plan for Skyrim? If we look at the activities of the members of the Stormcloaks, like that of the recovery of the Jagged Crown, Ulfric wishes to be viewed as the true High King of Skyrim, not just as the murderous rebel leader that he is painted to be. considering that he attempts to validate his claim to the throne of Skyrim with an artifact that has not been seen in several eras that was used by Ysgramor's line. Along with this, Ulfric did attempt peace with the Jarl of Whiterun, Jarl Balgruuf the Greater, although they had issues with each other for years prior to the Stormcloak Rebellion. Both Ulfric and Balgruuf both were opposed to the Thalmor, with Balgruuf openly allowing Talos worship to continue within the city of Whiterun. However, Balgruuf would still choose the Empire over Ulfric and the Stormcloaks, with the Stormcloaks later attacking Whiterun. As with the choice of siding with the Empire, Whiterun could be considered to be enemy territory. With the Stormcloaks' behavior, especially Ulfric's, they desired to have a true claim to the throne of Skyrim. By having the legitimacy, it would make them harder to challenge and make them more valid if there was to be a High King of Skyrim declared without the meddling of the Empire. But this is only part of the story. To learn more, we should discuss the key players. When it comes to important players, there is one who is neither man, nor mer, nor even beast that we should firstly discuss. This being Talos. Now, Talos worship under the White Gold Concordat was outlawed, this being due to Talos not being a god in their pantheon. So in many of the Mer pantheons, they have 8 divines rather than the 9 that are observed in several of the human pantheons. But there is a reason as to why he is so hated by the Aldmeri Dominion. Talos is the god version of Tiber Septim, and the Aldmeri Dominion despises Tiber Septim. So the second Aldmeri Dominion was an alliance between the Bosmer and Aldmer, with several treaties with other races, those not being too relevant at the moment. At this time, they were a sovereign kingdom that was one of the most stable within Tamriel. However, Tiber Septim, although never declaring war against them, posed a threat to the second Aldmeri Dominion. They would fight each other in various battles, and Tiber Septim would eventually defeat this second Aldmeri Dominion, this being with the assistance from the Dunmer, as they provided the Numidium. This would crush the Dominion and force them into being part of the Empire. Now, the Aldmer were not too forgiving, biding their time, hating Tiber Septim and then Talos. This is why the third Aldmeri Dominion would ban the worship of Talos. Now, Talos is not the only important character. We also, of course, have Jarl Ulfric Stormcloak, who is of course the leader of the Stormcloaks and Jarl of Windhelm. Now, we know that running the rebellion against the Empire was not always his plan. To learn about how that came to be, we should dig a little into his past. Around the year 161 in the 4th era, Ulfric would study the Way of the Voice under the Greybeards, being chosen by the Greybeards for this honor. Ulfric would study under the Greybeards for 10 years, this being before the outbreak of the Great War, which would occur in the year 101 in the 4th era, which is when he would choose to leave the Greybeards in order to join the fight, joining on the side of the Imperial Legion. Whilst Ulfric was fighting for the Imperial Legion, he would be captured by the Third Aldmeri Dominion, being captured during the Aldmeri campaign to take Imperial City. He would become a prisoner of the Aldmeri, being interrogated, which is where they learned that he was a rather valuable prisoner. This being due to Ulfric, at the time being the son of the Jarl of Windhelm. This would lead to him becoming the asset of Elenwen. Elenwen would oversee the interrogations of Ulfric. After some time, Ulfric would eventually break. This would lead to him providing information that he was made to believe was crucial in the Aldmeri takeover of the Imperial City. However, the city had already fallen before he would even break. After this, Ulfric was allowed to escape from his imprisonment, returning to fight on the side of the Imperial Legion to retake Imperial City in the Battle of the Red Ring in the year 175. With the end of the Great War, we would see the Markath incident and Ulfric being imprisoned. After this, we would see Ulfric eventually becoming the Jarl of Windhelm after his release. Now, what is interesting about this is how his treatment of citizens differs from his father's treatment of citizens, with Ulfric ignoring the suffering of the Dunmer who lived in the Grey Quarter, and housing the Argonians outside of the city as well. segregating all who weren't Nords to specific parts of the city or to the dock just outside of it. This being different to how Ulfric's father was described, as Ulfric's father was considered much more tolerant of those who were not native to Skyrim. Based on this, it indicates the picture of Skyrim that Ulfric envisioned, a Skyrim where it was only Nords, where if there were outsiders, they were lower class citizens, living in the slums, as the Grey Quarter is occasionally described. But anyway, there are other important characters when it comes to the Stormcloaks, one of these being Galmar Stonefist. Now, like Ulfric, Galmar fought in the front lines of the Great War for the Imperial Legion, risking life and limb for the Empire. But he would become disillusioned by the Empire when they would roll over and sign the White Gold Concordat that would basically turn the Empire into the puppets of the Thalmor. Galmar would join the Stormcloaks, believing that he was protecting his family and homeland from outsiders and the Empire by joining them. Now, Galmar would be no foot soldier in the Stormcloaks. He would become the right-hand man of Ulfric, becoming a general in the Stormcloak uprising. With this, Galmar desired to kick the Thalmor and the Imperial puppets out of Skyrim and rebuild it into the land it once was. Now, based on this, it is likely that Galmar is also one who is not exactly the most tolerant of those who are not Nords, nor is he tolerant of Nords who have accepted any support from the Empire, which is what we also see from Ulfric. But then there is also Ralof, one of the newer members of the Stormcloaks, who is worth noting, and now at the time of the first encounter with Ralof, he is just a member of the Stormcloaks, not one of the higher-ups. However, he does look up to Ulfric, idolizing him and his cause. Ralof, unlike the others, did not fight in the Great War, not being battle-hardened, instead being hopeful and optimistic about the world, even showing kindness, helping to get the last Dragonborn out of danger. So based on the important characters, what is the Stormcloaks' plan for Skyrim? Well, if we look at both Galmar and Ulfric, they desire a Skyrim without those they consider outsiders, with Ulfric being rather unkind to the Argonians and the Dunmer living in his city, and Galmar suggesting that he desired to protect Skyrim from outsiders. Ralof, on the other hand, does not seem to have an opinion on those who are not Nords, showing kindness no matter the race of the last Dragonborn, only indicating issues with the Thalmor, indicating that those who are higher in the Stormcloaks may have some issues with those who aren't Nords. So based on who the Stormcloaks are, their history, the Stormcloak Rebellion, and the key players, we can finally answer the question, what is the Stormcloaks' plan for Skyrim? Well, if we first take into consideration that the Stormcloaks as a group were initially established as a private militia and not as a rebellion, considering that they initially worked with the Empire as both Ulfric and Galmar, who were high-up members, served in the Imperial Legion, but also, as they, with the Markath incident, intended to hand over Markath to the Empire, this being for permission to worship Talos. However, this is where we see the defining point where the Stormcloaks move from being willing to work with the Empire to viewing the Empire as an enemy, with the Empire agreeing to arrest Ulfric and the Stormcloaks siding with the Thalmor over the Stormcloaks who had recovered the Reach from the Reachmen. Considering Ulfric's prejudice against non-Nords, this could have been a key moment that would have led to the poor treatment of the Dunmer and the Argonians in Windhelm. This also triggers their desire for Skyrim to be in the hands of the Nords, without outsiders. So the Stormcloaks believe that Skyrim could be better run by the Nords, as the Nords not only supplied the resources for the Imperials to rebuild after the Great War, greatly diminishing Skyrim of its resources, but the Imperials also used the Nords as foot soldiers for their army, leading to many Nords dying for the Empire to ultimately just become puppets. The Nords under the White Gold Concordat felt greatly restricted, as not only were they providing resources, but their freedoms were greatly infringed upon, being unable to worship Talos, who was important in the Nordic pantheon at that time. So the Stormcloaks' plan for Skyrim was to eradicate the presence of both the Empire and the Thalmor in Skyrim, removing all Jarls who were loyal to the Empire, potentially even going as far as to removing those who would be considered outsiders to Skyrim, so encouraging those who are not Nords to leave the province. The Stormcloaks would also retake the Reach for themselves from both the remaining Reachmen and the Jarl who is loyal to the Empire, With Skyrim being recovered from those who were considered outsiders, Nordic values would be encouraged and Talos worship would be legalized again. Ulfric Stormcloak would also use the Jagged Crown to stake his claim as High King of Skyrim, as this crown was previously used before High Kings were elected, furthering the return to a more traditional Skyrim, one without the Imperial influence. So let me know in the comments who you would side with, the Stormcloaks or the Imperials. A special thank you to all of our lore archaeologist supporters. You guys help keep this channel running. And thank you to anyone who is joining our memberships. In the meantime, if you enjoyed this video, you should check out this one. It is about Hermaeus Mora, one of the gods in the Nordic pantheon, and why anyone would choose to worship them.